Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today. Because today we are picking up where Friends Pitching Fantasy left off. We had decided we were going to read the Liveship Traders Trilogy by Robin Hobb, and today we have read Ship of Magic, and we have so much to say about it. And where we wanted to start was here with our spoiler-free discussion. Isn't that right, Dylan?
That's exactly right, Charles. This is something that we've started to do a little bit, is split our discussions of our main reads on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast into spoiler-free episodes that everyone can listen to. That's what you're listening to right now. And if you haven't yet read Ship of Magic, you're entirely safe here, and this could be a good intro to the book and also help you decide, is this a good book for me? So it becomes a little bit of a book recommendation episode when we loved a book, which I think this, Charles will get into a little bit more, but I think this will probably be the case here for both of us. And then we'll be bringing you, we're hoping to do just about a week from today. We'll be coming out with a Ship of Magic deep dive filled with spoilers. We're jumping off the ship and we're swimming all the way into the deep
serpent-filled waters, aren't we?
Yeah. That's exactly what we'll be doing. Hopefully a week from today, if all goes according to plan. And Charles, this is one that I'm really glad that we're doing the spoiler-free episode, because I feel as though I let myself down, and you too, Charles, and the listeners. I let everyone down. And the way I let everyone down is by not reading Ship of Magic until now. And this is something really interesting about the fantasy community, and the way that we talk about Robin Hobb's work is the Farseer Trilogy is her first series, and it is usually the one that's recommended to people when they're trying to get a taste of Robin Hobb's work. But you'll get these kind of murmurings. You'll hear them around, Charles, where people be like, oh, but you know what? I kind of feel like the Liveship Traders is her best work. You just hear that every once in a while. And like, you know what? I actually think that her later work's even better. And sometimes you hear that about authors and you love their first trilogy, and then you're like, I don't know. Could it really be better? And Charles, I feel like at least Ship of Magic, which is the only one we've read so far in this series, I feel like it is better in every respect, basically, than is the Farseer Trilogy, which we loved. And it's one of those books I'm like, I've heard so much about Farseer Trilogy, and then I've heard those little murmurs about how Liveship Traders is even better. And you know what? The murmurs should be yells. They should be
shouts,
screaming it from the rooftops.
Yeah, exactly.
Because this first book, at least, and I bet the series, was phenomenal. And we'll get into why, but I just want to lead with that is I highly recommend this book, and I would gladly recommend this book to people who haven't even read the Farseer Trilogy yet. I might even just make a habit of saying, hey, if you want to read Hobb, I'd actually say start with this book, Ship of Magic. What do you think, Charles?
I agree with you in most respects. You did say that you feel like you let yourself down. My thought reading this, I was like, the fantasy community has let me down. No one is championing this book as strongly as I would champion it having read it now. I was, the whole time I'm reading this, I'm like, how has no one told me about this book? I was just absolutely blown away because everyone, Robin Hobb's first trilogy, right? The Farseer trilogy is her flagship series, always recommended, always in those top 10 lists and all that stuff. But Assassin's Apprentice has always been met with, like, there's some people that don't like the approach of a very character driven, like, the entertainment is in the slow misery of poor Fitzchivalry. Some people just want to see action and politics and blood and guts and war.
The slow misery of poor Fitzchivalry. Say that 10 times fast.
Which is what that book maybe needs to be called. But I love that. We both love that book because it has the things that we like, which is really eloquent writing, really strong thematic development, and an even stronger understanding of character and character development. And those were the things that made us champions of the Farseer trilogy. I've defended Assassin's Apprentice many times. What nobody prepared me for was that everything that I felt like Farseer trilogy could do to improve, have more POV characters, have more action, have more intrigue, is done in the Liveship Traders Trilogy, essentially making it like the quintessential work for Robin Hobb, and I'm only halfway through the trilogy. I had to immediately pick up book 2, and so that's enough of a testament. So I'm over here being like, where are the people like screaming to read Ship of Magic? They're not screaming from the rooftops like they should be. So I was reading it just completely blown away. And when you look at Robin Hobb's writing, like, this book was written in 1998. What you also have to respect is that she wrote Farseer Trilogy. The first book, Assassin's Apprentice, was 95. And she released a book a year for 9 years straight. She cranked out 3 trilogies, a book a year, all in this realm of the Elderlings. So 95, 6, 7 was Farseer Trilogy. 8, 9, and 2000 was Liveship Traders, and then 2001, 2, and 3 was the Tawny Man trilogy. So just the breadth of work and the scale in which she's growing as an author and building on her skills is really great to watch. And I was super entertained with Ship of Magic, and I highly recommend it.
That's all well said, except the part where you got angry at everyone. But I understand. I understand your pain, Charles, because I do feel the same way that people should be shouting from the rooftops about how great this series is. And I do, the perspective that I bring toward this book as a part of Robin Hobb's catalog is that the first time that I attempted to read the Farseer trilogy, I finished book 1, and then I think I might have started book 2, but if I did, I didn't really get very far, and it was kind of for the same mixed feelings on it that a lot of people express. So I've always been very I've been very receptive, I like to think, to the criticisms that do get slung the way of the Farseer trilogy. I did find rereading it many years later being a much bigger fan of fantasy by the time I got back around to it, and not just reading it because I think the first time I read it, I looked at some list of like best fantasy books for fans of Game of Thrones, and it was like, if you love Jon Snow, then check out Assassin's Apprentice. Like, both are bastards and royal families and have had really hard lives and blah blah blah. And I'm like, I get those surface level comparisons that happen there, but Game of Thrones is this action-packed, intense series, and then you're dealing with, in Assassin's Apprentice, this almost case study into Fitzchivalry, and Fitzchivalry is a very passive character, and a character that is, you've called him everyone's favorite doormat of fantasy. Yes. And I think it just wasn't really what I was looking for at the time. I would not say Jon Snow is anything like that. And then coming back to it, I really enjoyed it. I appreciate its fantastic prose. I appreciate its just in-depth psychological profile of Fitzchivalry. But yeah, the one thing that I was still like, there are times where this is really slow because Fitz just does not take the initiative. And then when that's all you've read of Robin Hobb's work, it's so easy to just be like, okay, well, like, one of the criticisms that I would have for Hobb is that like, she doesn't really write as intense action and doesn't really have characters that are really active and all this kind of stuff. And then you're like, oh, maybe this isn't a fit for me if you're looking for those kind of things. But then you read Ship of Magic and you realize that the reason that you might have those kind of criticisms for Hobb's work is that was just a very genuine, true capturing of who Fitz is. And it just made the book that was a single first person point of view book come off like Hobb's faults were, as a writer, were Fitz Chivalry's faults as a character, like in terms of passiveness and like not taking initiative, right? And then you watch the mastery that is Robin Hobb using the rotating point of view and jumping into all of these different characters' heads who vary in so many ways, some of which are very proactive and some of which get into really action-packed scenes because of that. And this wide world with so many things going on, suddenly you realize, oh, those criticisms are not valid criticisms of Hobb as a writer. They're valid reasons why you might not love Fitz Chivalry's perspective in the Farseer trilogy. And that's okay. But I just feel like now, every time I start hearing those kind of criticisms of the Farseer trilogy, I'll say, totally understand where you're coming from. I had a similar reaction the first time I read it. Try Ship of Magic. And that all of those things that I hear all the time, I just feel like they're not present in Ship of Magic. As all the great things about the Farseer trilogy, the amazing understanding of character and how tight it is point of view, and feels like you're getting a case study on the characters. But then you get the incredible variety, and it just plays so well into Hobb's strengths and minimizes her the limitations that we're seeing when it was just Fitz Chivalry.
You said it, Dylan. I mean, we knew from reading Farseer Trilogy that Robin Hobb could write. And I just feel like Liveship Traders gives her more opportunities to flex her muscles. And when you go from characters like Fitz, who's a child, more of a tragic figure, relatively insignificant in the world of powerful figures in the world, to now these new characters, like you have this pirate captain, Kenneth, who is like so much fun to read, insanely one of my like favorite characters now, just because of how absolutely unhinged he is. But it allows you to kind of see her flex these different muscles and get into these other characters and the way she perceives the like masculinity, but with different characters. And then you have like these gender roles that have been pushed on certain people and how that affects them, and the way they reflect internally and how they perceive other characters who you've been in their POVs before. It's a commitment to character that we've only seen in like a Abercrombie like story, where Abercrombie uses it to be like kind of humorous at times and scathing while also taking character very seriously. Robin Hobb just does it to fully dive into this character and give you their full impression, and so it's kind of interesting to see it treated the other, like in a different way, but it's just that same level of mastery that I would highly recommend. One of the things that I wanted to get into in our spoiler-free review, because you recommended like let's read Liveship Traders first, and I would completely agree. I think it's worth noting that, you know, all of like the Farseer trilogy and this trilogy are technically part of an even larger series called The Realm of the Elderlings, that technically is in chronological order. It's like start with Assassin's Apprentice and read in publication order through the Fitz and the Fool trilogy that finished in 2017. So nearly 20 years of these books coming out. But so
coming
far,
out with regularity, because there are some series where you could say nearly 20 years, and it's been like 3 books. So
I mean, just 19 books in 20 years. Like, she's had no problems cranking them out. So, I mean, incredible volume. But, I feel like, you know, Sanderson gets credit for writing like a maniac. But, I mean, Robin Hobb is writing too. And then the level of intimacy and detail that she puts into each work, only 1 year apart, it's insane. I don't know how she does it, but I'm halfway through this trilogy. I'm almost 50% through book 2, The Mad Ship. And to me, like, there's certain series where I would recommend you have to start in publication order, read that first trilogy first, and then the second trilogy, and then the third, because the value that you get from being able to understand the references from the first trilogy is worth it, even if it's not the strongest work. I do not think that is the case here, and it sounds like you agree, where it's like, yeah, they mention stuff about the place where the Farseer trilogy has taken place, but so far there has been nothing that has added value to me to read the Liveship Traders that I would say, okay, read the Farseer trilogy before Ship of Magic, and be like, no, you need to jump into Ship of Magic right away. Like that is the book for me to read for Robin Hobb's work, and then go from there. So far, I mean, there's 3 other trilogies that I haven't read from her in Part of This World, but so far I think we're in agreement, right, Dylan?
Yeah, 100%. I would refer to the references as Easter eggs at most, at least having read only the first book here. Who knows? By the time we get to the third book, who knows? Maybe it'll be this huge Avengers-style overlap between everything. But I kind of doubt it based on what I've seen so far. And I know for sure I would highly recommend Ship of Magic to people who've never read the Farseer trilogy. It's like offhand references at most that really get made here, and in no way does your enjoyment of the book, at least the first book, hinge on any understanding of the Farseer trilogy or anything that's happened there. It just is, to me, and that's why, look, we'll have a bigger picture understanding of the whole series once we've finished it, and we can say whether or not we recommend just read through the whole series of Liveship Traders and then go back to Farseer trilogy, or if there's value in reading it in some other order. But I have no issue saying I'd pretty much say just start with Ship of Magic if you're starting with Hobb, or start with Ship of Magic if you found Farseer trilogy difficult to get into for whatever reason. And that's pretty great. I mean, you brought up Abercrombie, and I think that Abercrombie's work is one of those where it's like, yeah, there are standalone books that come later on in the world, and you could read them just by yourself, but there's so much you're missing in terms of the character building that's come before, some of which on the like important point of view characters, many of which featured in earlier books, and Abercrombie just keeps building on that, or characters that'll show up and play a small role that you know so much about, that deepens your understanding in the standalone. Just for anyone who hasn't read Abercrombie, there's the first trilogy, then there's 3 standalones, and then there's another trilogy that follows that. I always recommend, and you do too, Charles, like read that in publication order. But because you miss a lot. But I don't think, at least in the first book here, I don't think you really miss anything in Robin Hobb's Ship of Magic, by nature of not having read the Farseer trilogy. And there's other Abercrombie, the character point of view stuff that you were talking about a little bit, Charles. I think there's a lot to say in terms of parallels about Abercrombie's character work and his understanding of point of view, and ability to entrench you in point of view, that I feel like Hobb and Abercrombie almost stand alone in my experience. I'd maybe throw like George R. R. Martin or someone in there too, but in terms of their ability to just jump into a point of view and immediately ground you in that person's perspective in a way that feels so real right away, and you just get it. And it's like, I feel that there are lots of point of views in this book, and some of which appear far less than others, and she'll just like throw you in, let's say there's a 12 or 13-year-old girl in this story that does not have a ton of point of views, especially early on in the book. And she's not like a hugely impactful character, especially early in the book. And then she's just kind of there. And then Hobb throws you into her perspective, and she just has you completely tied to this point of view of a 13-year-old, 12-year-old girl who just wants to grow up and wants to do all these things that she sees adults doing, but is like totally unequipped for it in consequential ways that we won't get into. But it's like unbelievable for a tiny side character at the start for Hobb to have this level of understanding and this level of ability to just, okay, now you're in this point of view, and it's immediately so defined. And she's not my favorite character or anything like that, but she was a character that I thought was extremely like illustrative of Hobb's skill to just take this side character and bring him up. And Abercrombie is so different in tone and so different in his like sense of humor and the darkness of his story and the way he expresses that than Hobb is. But the one thing that I see as a huge similarity is their understanding of point of view, their ability to tie you so closely to it, and their just incredible character work in terms of character development. It's
so
amazing.
Good. And Robin Hobb has this really unique, like, perceptive understanding of like how people interact with each other and see each other and what makes like a scene. So many times you hear authors be like, oh, a scene is really just two people in a room talking at each other, you know? And Robin Hobb somehow finds like the beauty and the like really intimate nature of people's personalities in those moments, and they're always layered and they're always contextual on other characters' stories and other plot lines. Like the way that she keeps the scenes moving, like I find myself reading a scene where it's, you know, the daughter you mentioned, the mom, and then the grandma, the matriarch, are in a room talking, and it's as engrossing as any battle scene I've ever read, because it she finds the interest in like how these characters see each other and are talking to each other. Like you just jump into this teenage girl's POV right away, and she's like, oh, why can't would it kill my mom and my grandmom to like dress or like put on makeup and wear nice clothes and do all this stuff? And you know that they're struggling financially, and they're just like all the intricate layers of that pile up on top of each other. And they stack in such a way that every scene has so much meaning packed into it. And you learn more about these characters that just keeps you engaged and hooked. And it's really a masterclass of like, it's never just two people in a room talking at each other. It always is couched in something else, even if it's just how these characters are perceiving each other and how that may change in the conversation. I can't even describe it without going into spoilers, but it's one of those things that I'm just constantly impressed by with Robin Hobb. And it's like what other people would need to like have a gory, bloody, or super like graphic content, whether it's sexual or violent, like to keep you entertained. Robin Hobb is doing that with people interacting with each other. It's a rare skill that is quintessentially hers that I couldn't recommend this book enough to anyone interested in writing, to be like, this is how you write a dialogue scene, this is how you write an exposition scene, this is how you build exposition. Like all that stuff is in here so masterfully. I couldn't even believe it.
Yeah, that's so well said, and something I observed as well, Charles. There's this chapter that stuck out that's called Family Matters, and it's actually kind of two halves with different point of views, but I'm talking about the second half of it here, and I feel no issue getting into this in a spoiler-free episode, because it really is one of those scenes that on the surface is just like a bunch of people in a family sitting around and talking to each other, but they're dealing with the like weighty matters that their family are dealing with, and everyone's coming from their own unique perspective, be it Kyle, who is basically the son-in-law, is to the grandmother, the matriarch that you mentioned, and it's basically Kyle, it is the grandmother whose name is it Ronica? Is that or I always get their names confused. Or is Ronica the sister? Either way.
Which sister are we talking about? Because there's like
so there's Ketria, Yeah.
Ketria.
Ketria is Kyle's wife, right?
Yep.
Kefria.
And then there's Malta, the daughter.
Yes. And also, I believe Veronica is the grandma, right?
Yes, you're right.
So they're like all kind of sitting around and they're just talking about things that are relevant to both, like Malta growing up, and should she be presented in the ball as a woman now that she's going to be 13, and then it's like also their financial difficulties that they've been dealing with, and Kyle comes from this like very chauvinistic culture, and he's comes from a very narrow-minded perspective on it. Then you've got someone like Ronk who's focused on the like what are the implications for this within our culture and that kind of stuff. And Malta is coming from this perspective of just like, I want to grow up, I want to be a woman, I want to go be courted and that kind of stuff. And everyone's got their own point of view. And it's like, these are things that would be so easy in so many books in a less deft hand than Hobbs, for me to be like, geez, this is so boring. Like, I don't care if she goes to the ball or doesn't go to the ball. And somehow Robin Hobb is able to, like you've said, Charles, like put you on the edge of your seat because of your understanding of her characters that she's able to convey to you. And somehow she's able to make you feel the stakes are ridiculously high for these moments that would feel very low leverage in a typical book. And it's like a cheat code. If you can get people on the edge of their seat in a chapter called Family Matters over like the dynamics of a small group of people in a family who each come from a different perspective, and the stakes are, will someone attend a ball or things like that. It's like everything is so loaded because you understand these characters so well and what they want and what they care about, that you're on the edge of your seat over the tiniest conversations.
And it's to even reference that same chapter, right? It's not even that they're having the conversation in that moment about whether she should go to the ball or not. It's also like what we know in context from what happened right before. You know the complicated relationship between Kefria and her husband. And her husband, who's not even in the scene, from decisions that he made earlier on, his chauvinistic ways of whether he's promising stuff to the daughter or forcing the family to go in a specific direction with what they trade in their ship and everything. It comes into that scene and it makes itself present in Kefria's battle to try and understand, like, how much authority do I have in this moment with my grandmother and with my daughter? And she's trying to find her own place in that scene of like, can I boss people around, or should I like listen to, or do they make sense? Should I just be passive in this moment? And she struggles with that throughout the whole book. And this is just another place where she's trying to figure out, like, I technically inherited this family as the eldest sibling, but I'm at the mercy of my grandma, and my daughter's trying to work around me, my husband's bossing me around, and it's engrossing, and you feel for her and you connect with her in a way. So when her daughter's like, but I want to go to the ball, you're like, is this the moment where she's gonna put her foot down? Like, you're invested in that. It's that human connection that we have, that we can just latch on to Kefria right away, that we're rooting for whether the daughter goes to the ball or not. As a 30-something-year-old bearded man, I'm like, is she going to go to the ball? I don't know.
The beard is playing an important role in this, Charles. I'm glad you brought it in. And I think that, I as a fellow 30-something bearded man, early 30s over here.
Early 30s over here, too?
You're sneaking up on those mid-30s, Charles. But
not quite.
But anyway, and I mean, Charles and I are talking so much about a character like Kefria, who is more passive, more similar to someone like Fitz in the Farseer trilogy,
it's an interesting
stakes are way more. Yeah, there are definitely some similarities, but then what's amazing about this book is that can be juxtaposed against being in the point of view of, let's say, Captain Kennett, who you referenced earlier, Charles, who is, I mean, came before Jorg of of the Broken Empire fame. Mark Lawrence's Prince of Thorns being the first book in that series. And it's like we always talk about, like, Jorg is a horrible person and just pretty evil in a lot of ways. And at the same time, he's such a compelling character because he's so proactive and he's like Machiavellian, and the way he sees the world is really interesting. It's like Captain Kennett, who did come before, is like, reminds me of Jorg in a lot of ways. Obviously, he's not like, Jorg is like a teenager at the start, Prince of Thorns, and Kennett is older. But this idea of a character that is pretty much without empathy, without like feelings toward other people, and just has the things he wants and will do anything to get those things. And he is so proactive, and his chapters are filled with action, and a lot of times getting into battles with, like, he's a pirate. They're taking over other ships at times, and it's like, oh, okay, so Robin Hobb can write a character like Kennett as compelling and with as much understanding of the character as someone like Fitz or like Kefrit or
Kefria,
it's
or
like
whatever. Yeah.
I'm getting the one. It's hard because there's like Ketcherkin in Farseer trilogy, so I always get it messed up, like Kefria and Ketcherkin. So anyway, it's Kefria. So anyway, Kefria and Fitz, these more passive characters, are done extremely genuine. And if it was just a book about Kefria, I would see the same sort of criticisms coming up in terms of like, she doesn't do anything, she's like a doormat. And it's like, well, that's what that character is kind of like, but she's complex and interesting. That being said, Kennett is anything but a doormat. And
Right.
he's taking action, and he is getting all these action scenes, and he's pretty evil himself. So it's like,
the sociopathy going on is fascinating, and we like totally so much to get into there. But I see where you're going, and I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and it just shows Hobbs' incredible character work, and the reason that it's not as difficult to get into some of these more like passive, like culture-based discussions about balls and things like that is because we know next up might be, you mentioned sea serpents and pirates and that kind of stuff. So it's got something for everyone, and it never weighs down on you to be having some of these less action-packed moments.
Exactly. It's well said. And I think the best testament to me recommending it is I jumped right into book 2 against the betterment of our reading schedule, but it's one of those things where it's like I can't put it down. And I'll say just there's some scenes in book 2 and my jaw was like on the floor, not in terms of like, oh my god, something crazy happened, which they do, but it's just like the scenes, I'm just like totally baffled as to like how good they are. So it's one of those things where it's like it keeps going. And so I think this spoiler-free review has gone as far as we can go into like, yes, if you haven't read it, read it. Just trust me on this. Like it's good. Like for anyone that's ever like kind of murmured it to me as a recommendation past, shame on you for not being more adamant and screaming it from the rooftops. Wow. How dare you? Like all this talk I've said about Charles, how much I love.
Read our emails. So we did get a very persuasive email about.
Well, think about how many like book recommendation series we've done, and like how many times like there's certain books that I've had pressed upon me to read. Okay, and I will say that this is as good or better than any of those. So now it's my job to press this onto others. So
are you saying that you hated Lies of Loch Lamora? Are you saying that on the air, Charles?
No, I loved Lies of Loch Lamora, but what I'm saying is the amount of energy that got, and then there's this, which is like this deserves as much attention as Lies of Loch Lamora, and kudos for being finished as well. So like that's just a big selling point there. So you've got the official FTF seal of approval. it's a big year in fantasy. I think of, Assassin's Apprentice was a finalist in our best read of last year when we did our March Madness. This is, we've got a long way till next March, but this is a contender for sure. So we got a lot of exciting reads, including an Abercrombie release. We've got Christopher Buehlman release. So a lot of happenings going on this year. So some Sanderson releases, and we'll just have to see where it goes. But for now, Dylan, I think we've said it all, right?
I think we've said it all, Charles. I think all that is left to say is that nonsense we say as the sweet, sweet outro music plays in the background. So let's get that music pumping, Charles.
Agreed. Here we go. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, the best way to support us is by following us and engaging with us over on the socials. And hey, when we drop that in-depth, spoiler-filled discussion of Ship of Magic that's even more impassioned than this, we're going to announce it over on the socials, and you don't want to miss it. And that's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and TikTok, and then at the FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end on Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than following us and engaging with us over on the socials, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify, where most of you are listening. You just got to go to About at the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed, then click where the stars are, and you know how many of those to throw to us. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That means you can write nice things about us. You can say, "Hey, Charles, I'm ready to shout at the rooftops," shout from the rooftops, about Ship of Magic. Finally, you have made me feel empowered to do so instead of just murmuring.
I give you that power.
Also, yes, Charles has empowered you. But you can also follow or subscribe. That's something I don't think I've said yet in
this is a
entire
new
200
dialogue to the outro script here.
I was just thinking, Charles, isn't that probably the most important thing that people can do is if they just heard this podcast and they've never listened before, it's subscribe or follow us, because then you'll see us pop up.
Yeah, download a bunch of episodes, tell your friends to download a bunch of episodes. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm adding in subscribe or follow.
Interesting. I like it.
Subscribe on Apple, follow on Spotify, all that kind of stuff. So we won't have to explain anymore, but yes, I'll do that. And anyway, you don't have to, though, even though we might like to ask you to do that, because just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Well said, Dylan. Just listening. So appreciated. So fantastic. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.